So in this video, I want to introduce you to pocket joinery, or otherwise known as pocket screws. And it's a method of joining pieces of wood, something like this. So it's really a method of joining butt-joined pieces of wood together. So in the same way that the dowel joint connects pieces of wood like this, pocket screws do the same thing. They can do other jobs too, but they're mostly useful for this kind of joint. And they're quite simple, they're quite fast. I would say that pocket joinery is the most modern of woodworking joints because it was invented not too long ago by a company called Craig, and they still do the best job on pocket joinery accessories and tools and jigs and things like that. So in a nutshell, a pocket joint is connected with screws, but the screws are driven into a pocket, a shallow angled pocket. So it allows you to drive the screw from this face, extending out this end of the piece of wood, and then biting into the adjoining piece, like this. So it really all comes down to being able to drill that all-important, very shallow angled hole where you want it to go. And the only way you're going to do that is with some kind of a jig to guide the drill bit. Now this is the drill bit that is used with the Craig system, any kind of pocket joinery actually. And you'll see it's got a fairly large body for most of it, and then a small section here. And the idea is that it's going to create a hole that has a shoulder in it. So a shoulder is the ledge of wood that will be formed where this part of the drill bit transitions to that part. And into this hole, we will drive a screw, like this one. This is a special screw, specially meant for pocket hole work. And it's going to rest against the shoulder. So it's going to easily slip into the larger hole, but then the edge of the head is going to hit the shoulder of wood created where the big part of the bit meets the little part of the bit. And that's what's going to pull this joint together. There's no way we could ever drill the hole we need to drill without some sort of a guide, something that's going to hold the bit at the right angle consistently as it goes down. And this is the cheapest and simplest pocket hole drilling jig you'll ever find. That's why I'm demonstrating it here. I have some more complicated ones, including a benchtop model that can really do a lot of pocket holes quickly. But you don't need that. This is inexpensive, simple to use, and it's what I'm going to be showing you here. So just to help you understand things a little bit better, a joint like this, I think, should really have 2 pocket screws, and the drilling that happens only happens in the piece of wood that the screws enter. We do not drill any holes into the piece of wood that it's going to be joining to. The screws will dig their own hole, and so we don't need to drill there. All we need to do is to drill into this piece of wood, and this guide will make sure it all happens properly. So as I said, this is the simplest. It's not particularly fast, but it does the job. And we need to anchor this jig. So we're gonna anchor it this way. I find it works quite well to line up the edge of the jig with the edge of the piece of wood and the end of the jig with the end of the piece of wood. So we're firm now, we're ready to go. I'll chuck the drill bit into the drill and drill our first hole. Now this collar is very important because it makes sure that we don't drill too far. We want sufficient wood where the shoulder starts towards the end of the piece of wood to give enough strength for that screw to rest on. So if we drilled too far, if this collar was misadjusted, say further up the shank, we could drill too far and maybe even make the big hole all the way through instead of having part of the hole this smaller diameter. So that's an adjustment you don't need to change very often once you've gotten it right. And We just stick this in here, crank up the drill. That's it for this side. We'll just repeat the process over here. Oops. That's it. Now that does not look very pretty, does it? That's why whenever you're working with pocket screws, you need to remember to orient the back of the pieces of wood you're working with for drilling like this. Craig does have some angled plugs that you could put in here. I'm going to show you those in a minute. I still don't think they look very, very good. So I only ever use pocket screws where no trace of them is going to be seen anywhere. They're not particularly strong either, pocket screws, but they are fast and convenient, and sometimes you don't need insane amounts of strength. So that's where I generally use pocket screws. I was kind of prejudiced against them at first. It just seemed like some sort of newfangled, gimmicky kind of thing. Definitely not traditional, definitely not the old way they used to do it right. But I eventually did see some uses for pocket screws, and now I use them fairly regularly for certain applications. So I think you should consider them too. We've got the start of what we're doing, but we don't have a completed joint yet. Because what has to happen now is we have to connect it to another piece of wood, and we have to drive the screws. And if I just try to do that here on the workbench, I can assure you that's not going to work. There's going to be movement, there's going to be wonkiness. The joint is not going to be flush, perfectly flush here. There's going to be a little bit of a mismatch. So the second part of the process involves locking down the joint in some way. And that's where this device comes in. It's just a kind of a vice grip plier that's fastened to a base. And the idea here is that we line things up. We get things just the way we want them. Need to make it a little bit tighter. There. Now, flush here, flush here. Of course, it's also flush on the bottom because these two pieces of wood are the same thickness. All I need to do now is to chuck in a screwdriver bit and drive the screws home. Now, I need to tell you something right now before I continue. This is a pocket screw, and you don't want to use regular deck screws. The head isn't the right shape. The screw thread profile isn't ideal, except if you get genuine pocket screws, and that's what these are. This is a coarse thread, and let's just compare it to another one, a fine thread, so you can really see the difference there. The fine thread is recommended for hardwood. We're using white pine here, so we're going to go with the coarse thread. It's pretty easy, actually, to overdrive these, which means to tighten them up so much that the threads start to chew up the wood, and the screw can't really grab onto the wood anymore. So you want the pocket joint to be, the pocket screws, to be as tight as necessary, but not overly tight, because you're going to start losing joint strength after that. So if you come around here for a minute and just you just take a look, it's really quite easy to see what's going on here. So you can see the big hole here, and then there's that shoulder. I was telling you about. That shoulder was created by the fact that this drill bit is kind of unusual and that we have the big part transitioning to the little part. So right now I'm just going to be driving one of these screws into the little hole. And that's it. Did you see how that other side of the wood moved a little bit? It kind of pulled in tighter. Because this clamp holds the wood down with a lot of force, so it's flush here, and it's not going to get out of alignment on the side. But this clamp does nothing to pull the joint in tightly. That's where the screws come in. You often see the pocket joint being pulled a little bit tighter as the screw is driven home. There, did it again. That's basically it. Let's see how we did. Okay, there's a little bit of dirt here. It's picked up some dirt from the base there, but that's a nice tight joint. I mean, that dark line there, that's not a gap, that's just some dirt. A few metal filings here, I think. A joint like this would be assembled and then sanded as a unit. So all of these little bits of dirt and things would be removed. But look at here, a nice tight joint. It's surprisingly strong. I could break that with my hands, I'm sure I could, but where pocket screws shine, you just don't need a whole lot of strength. It's basically fast, doesn't need any glue, doesn't look great from the back, but that's okay, because everywhere you use these, like for instance, pre-assembling a face frame. Imagine a four-sided frame like this that forms the front of the cabinet. Perfect for pocket screws. Door and window trim, another great example. When I install door and window trim, especially stuff I make myself, I make the frames into a complete unit, four-sided frame, joined and even finished before it goes up. It's a lot faster. You get perfectly tight joints and they never come apart. So if you're looking to expand your joinery capabilities, one of the first options is one that I've explained to you before. Dowel joinery is relatively inexpensive to get into and very wide applicability. This is very inexpensive to get into, even less expensive than dowel joints. Very wide applicability, but just not quite the strength. So you won't go wrong getting a little jig like this and giving things a try. And just before I finish up, I want to talk to you about the need for organization. It's a very, very important part of being a decent woodworker. So at this stage in your woodworking career, you probably don't have a lot of stuff, and maybe you haven't even thought about the need for organization. But the thing about woodworking is there's really almost no end of tools you can get, big and small. And it's the small side of things that I want to talk to you about now. There are many tools and accessories in the world of woodworking that need a lot of little bits and pieces. Pocket joinery is just one example. And that's why I strongly recommend you make organization part of how you develop as a woodworker. So this is my box. It's reserved for pocket hole stuff. And here you can see all the little doodads. Remember I told you there were some plugs that you can get for plugging up those angled holes? Well, here you've got some. This is a plastic version. It's not meant to be finished or anything. It just kind of goes over and covers it and looks nice. The wooden one you'd sand flush and finish along with the rest of the project. Some more drill bits, some screws, some holders and things under here. We've got some more of those special vice grips. My point here, though, is just to alert you to the fact, or probably remind you is a better word, that you can have all the tools in the world, but unless you know exactly where all the accessories are and you can put your fingers on them and you know reliably whether, oh, it's time to buy some more of that stuff or I really should get this accessory, you need to have a place to keep things. And boxes like this have proven to me to be very worthwhile. So consider that when you're buying a tool, it's not just a matter of whether you have the money to buy it and also whether you need the tool. But do you have a home for it in your workspace? Especially, do you have a home for the little accessories, nuts, bolts, little fixtures, consumable items? Keep that in mind as you build your woodworking collection and your skills, and before you know it, you'll be a great woodworker who knows exactly where all their great stuff is.